Hello internet strangers and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing Final Fantasy XVI Rising Tide. As most of you already know by now, Final Fantasy Rising Tide, the DLC, came out last Friday, and I have been having a blast playing this game. In this review, we're going to be going over the story of the DLC without getting into late game spoilers, what the DLC has to bring to the table, and last, what we could expect in the future, if anything at all. Final Fantasy XVI Rising Tide DLC is a complete package, and this review was made for the people of the internet. Story. For anyone who's played FF16, I'm sure you guys have noticed that there is a missing icon, and that icon is known as Leviathan the Lost because they've been missing for practically a century by now. And that's exactly what this expansion tackles. Before having access to the mission, you're going to have to complete a couple of prerequisites. The most important prerequisite is subscribing to the channel because we're trying to hit 300 subs before the end of the month. Okay, for real now. For you to gain access to the mission, you're going to have to complete both Jill's and Joshua's side quests to have them as available party members. This mission only becomes available once you have the Make It Back to Origin mission available. So you pretty much have to get to the end of the game before having access to any of the DLC content. Once you've completed these quests, you'll receive a missive from a stranger asking for aid to help the icon of Leviathan. After accepting the quest, this is when we meet a character named Shula, a member from a tribe once thought extinct and the kind of pseudo-guardian of Leviathan. After explaining her origins and her purpose for reaching out to you, she then brings you to the sea into a world once thought completely destroyed because it has been protected by a glamour, making it seem non-existent. This is a very welcome change because by the time you get to the end of the game, the skies are gray, the color palette is extremely bland and dark, so being in a new area feels very refreshing. It gives Final Fantasy X Besaid vibes. If any of you have played FF10, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Think of like Florida-ish. After being brought to the new area and completing a couple of side quests to unlock the shop and forge, you'll also learn what is going on with the Dominant of Leviathan. Turns out about 80 years ago, the Dominant of Leviathan was still just a baby, and the people of the tribes told themselves, well, if we simply sacrifice one child, we won't have to deal with Leviathan anymore. However, when they attempted to stop Leviathan from fully priming, he primed anyways, and this is when they decided to freeze the child in time while in the middle of priming. Armed with this information, Clive decides to absorb Leviathan from this baby, in the hopes that when they release him from his time prison, he won't fully prime. And as you guys can all imagine, that does not exactly go as planned. As you go on the journey to free Leviathan, you will encounter brand new enemy types, 3 new bosses, 3 new main bosses, and you get to learn a little bit more about Leviathan and the icon of Shiva as well. As for the rest of the story, I'm not going to dive any deeper into it because I think this is an experience that you just have to live for yourself. Just know that the DLC Rising Tide really wraps up the story nicely and ties up a lot of loose ends, which means it could be a little harder in the future to add additional content, but more on that later. What's new? As I mentioned earlier, the DLC does bring you to a new area, and with this new area, it's not just the one boss fight. I believe there's a total of 3 unique boss fights in the DLC. There are new variations on old enemy types, and you even get a hunt as well, and there's some completely brand new enemies as well. Now, the part that you guys have all been waiting for, you also gain access to the new icon Leviathan. Thankfully, you get this pretty early in the DLC, and I gotta say that the Leviathan power set is pretty impressive. When you use it, you will go into a form change similar to that of Odin. Your square attack is completely changed. It is now a long range attack. Your magical attack is now an AoE ability, and the best part of the transformation is that your dodge completely changes. You now slide further and faster than a regular dodge, and then you can chain a secondary dodge to go even further beyond. And if that wasn't enough, you get a final epic boss battle playing as Ifrit versus Leviathan. And once you complete that boss battle, that's when the real fun begins. After defeating Leviathan, you then gain access to a 9th and final iconic ability, which I'm gonna let you guys discover for yourselves because I did not see it coming. I did not see this iconic ability becoming part of the moveset, and god am I happy that I did not see that coming, because there was one hell of a surprise. But wait, there's more. This is definitely the best part and most unexpected part of the DLC. After completing the quest and getting your access to the 9th and final icon, you'll also get something called the Kairos Gates. For anyone who's played the DMC franchise, I'm sure you guys are aware of the Bloody Palace. Kairos Gates is fairly similar to Bloody Palace, except instead of going up 100 floors, you have 20 floors. However, depending on what difficulty you're playing on, the floor enemies will change. A quick example, on the normal difficulty, the first floor, the third wave, is simply going to be a bunch of mob enemies. And if you're playing on the Final Fantasy difficulty, which has a level cap increase of 110 now, you'll be playing, the third wave is going to be a chimera instead of mob enemies. Oh, and you also get radiant versions of all of the epic weapons for completing the Kairos Gates. You'll get like a radiant version of the Flame Tongue, a radiant version of Everdark. It's truly amazing. And if that wasn't enough already, you also gain a bunch of accessories that will affect your iconic abilities that are actually game changing, like increasing the timing window for the permafrost ability from Shiva, or having the plane shift ability from Phoenix allow you to go further and faster than normal. So these are really game-changing accessories, and you get new weapons too, and they're not just skin changes. Like there's the Thornberry Knife, which does like I think 700 will damage. It doesn't do the most amount of attack damage, but it is the weapon that does the most of will damage in the game. And it's pretty sick too. Unfortunately, there are no additional costumes, but hey, you never know, something could happen in the future, and I'm sure once the game hits PC, the modding community is going to have a field time with the game. What's to come in Final Fantasy XVI's future? As I mentioned earlier, the DLC doesn't really feel like it's missing much, and it really does tie the story up very well. Which doesn't bode well for the future, because it does feel like it was the missing piece of the pie. However, not all hope is lost, because as we know, Final Fantasy XVI Rising Tide is the second and final DLC ... According to Michael Christopher Koji Fox, who is the localization director of FF16. So there's still a little bit of hope for future installments. Because the story of Clive is so neatly wrapped, adding more to Clive's story might feel a little bloated, so I could see them taking a different direction. And that's why I believe that the next DLCs are actually not going to be Clive focused. This is what I'm hoping to see in the future. I can see them come up with an easy three additional episodes, quests, whatever you want to call them. However, these additional episodes would be focusing on different characters, and those three characters being Cid, Jill, and Joshua. Here are a couple of episodes idea that I think that the FF team could do for us. The first story would be Cid's story. Who was he when he was still working with Benedikta? What is the relationship they had? We know that they used to be lovers, but I would love to see how that relationship formed, what it was like, and ultimately, when did Cid break away from Benedikta and form the Hideaway in his like rebellious group? Next up would be the story of Jill. You could definitely make a scenario episode for Jill, what it was like after the fall of Rosaria, when she was forced to go to war and they kept using other kids as hostages. What it's like to play as a dominant who is forced to go into war constantly could be an incredibly interesting story. And last but definitely not least would be the story of Joshua. What was he doing in all this time? What happened after the battle with Clive? How did he meet this lady that's like his attendant? And most importantly, how did he find the information on Ultima, and how did he know to capture him? This is all questions that have gone unanswered, so Clive's story is complete, but the story of Jill, Joshua, and Cid still leaves a lot to be desired, and I'm here for it personally. I want to know what happened in the time that Clive was separated from his allies. Final thoughts. When it comes to storytelling, Final Fantasy rarely ever misses, and the DLC is no exception. This was the cherry on top to the mega sundae of FF16. Rising Tide brings so much new content that I could see myself easily dumping more than the aforementioned 10 hours because of the Chaos Gates, and I think more games should have some type of training room or Bloody Palace room or like floors kind of room, because it's just a good time. Things might look calm for the future of the franchise, however, I wouldn't be surprised if Final Fantasy 16 gets the same treatment as Final Fantasy 15 and making a bunch of non-playable characters playable by giving them their own separate episodes. I'm just some guy on the internet, and Final Fantasy Rising Tide is what a DLC should be. That's going to be ending today's video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, be sure to hit like, share, favorite, and subscribe, because we're trying to hit 300 subs before the end of the month. And if you don't want to help, well, remember, at the end of the day, I'm just some guy on the internet, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace. If you want to see more of my face, be sure to click on the videos you see on screen right now.